Hello, historians! This is Miss Melton here to talk to you about what life was like for groups of people in the North versus the South. We've already talked about what the land was like at the end of the Civil War and overall how the Civil War affected people, land, businesses. But now let's focus on the people. So, civilians are people not in the military. So, first, we're going to focus on those people. In the North, people did not suffer from lack of food and supplies. But guess what? In the South, the civilians' population suffered from lack of food and supplies because of the blockade and the disruption of agriculture. Because of the lack of food of supply, there were bread riots and other riots in some places, demanding that they lower the price of food because food had become so much more expensive because there was so more little of it. The war in the North started businesses as the government granted contracts for industries to make military supplies. So where a factory might make one thing, now it's making military supplies. So the factories in the North did benefit. The government also issued paper money that kept its value after the war. So even though it was technically Union money, that money was the United States money, and the Confederacy did not survive the Civil War, so its money ended up being worthless after the war. Now, in the South, the slaves were free, so the planters lost their labor force and a great deal of their wealth, because remember, your wealth was determined by, in the South, if you owned more slaves, you were wealthier. And in the North, factories continued to produce goods even though immigration had slowed down, and immigration were people who came from other countries to start a new life in America. And so that is the difference of the people in the South who weren't civilians. They did not go in the military. Now let's focus on the soldiers. In both regions, many young men, because we said you could go to war very early. There were even drummer boys who were 12. Many young men from both sides fought in the war. Members of the same family had supported different sides. So even if you were in the Confederate, you might have joined a Union army, or if you were in the Union, you might have joined a Confederate army. And when you go back home to your family, whichever side won or lost, it might be upsetting for both sides. The wealthy were often able to pay for someone else to take their place. And at first, the war was an adventure for most men who joined, but soon became a challenge of endurance and survival. Both sides, remember, thought that the war would be over very short. So they probably didn't prepare their minds, their bodies, their supplies to be gone so long. The war was long, and soldiers often had little food, clean water, shelter, and clothes. Over 600,000 men died on both sides, and over 1,100,000 were injured, and many lost arms and legs. So we said the wealthy could pay for someone to take their place, and the South, planters were even exempt. They didn't have to go to war if they owned more than 20 slaves, because then it was thought that they needed to stay at home and take care of their slaves, so maybe there wouldn't be an uprising. Because remember, who was at home taking care of everything? If the man of the house was out at a battle, it was the women, mothers, daughters, wives. So in both regions, women were left in charge of their homes and farms or businesses while the men were away fighting. So even in the North, if you owned a bakery or a candle shop or clothing shop, the women was left in charge, and they probably had not done all of the types of work that the men had done on a regular basis. So it was very difficult for them to, just like in the South if they were in charge of their farm or plantation. Because so many men died in the war, many women had to continue managing their families after the war. So, 600,000 men died. So that's 600,000 families affected by the men that died in the war. Lost their husbands, lost their sons, their fathers, and they were left to take care of everything afterwards, which many were probably not used to, because the men kind of took charge of everything. Remember, women couldn't vote, women couldn't own land or businesses, so that became very difficult. In the North, women served as nurses or workers in factories, and in the South, women were left to manage the family and continue operating the farms. Um, Others in the North and in the South rolled bandages or knitted socks at home to send to soldiers. And in the South, they also served as nurses, and they continued managing during the difficult time of rebuilding. So that is some information about the North versus the South as the groups of people that were there during Reconstruction.